What's bloody happening here then? Look at this. That's a party boat called the Yellow Submarine. That's what everybody else is up to when they're in Rhodes. Not me though. Well, hello folks. I'm on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea, at the very edge of the Aegean. Out there somewhere in one direction is Cyprus and the distant Near East beyond, with the Levant going on down the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers to the very first civilizations on Earth. In the other direction, you have the Greek islands, the Cycladic Islands, Crete, mainland Greece. And between them is Anatolia, Asia Minor. Now, it's a large geographical area, but astonishingly, all these places, they haven't just been Greek in the modern age, but Mycenaean Greeks settled them all throughout the late Bronze Age. They're very disparate places, they're very far apart. Just imagine the sailing vessels that were needed for these journeys. And they were sailing vessels, they had sails. Unfortunately, not much is known about the ways that Mycenaeans actually got around. Very few depictions of ships are seen, and as far as I'm aware, no shipwrecks that are definitively classed as Mycenaean. We do, however, have other shipwrecks, particularly near the city of Bodrum. A number of them have been discovered. This Uluburun shipwreck is filled with glittering objects from all over the world at that time. Things from the Hittite Empire, from Mycenaean Greece, from Syria, the Levant, Egypt, even unworked ivory from possibly northern India. Also have stamp seals, scarabs from Egypt, these administrative goods that helps these items go on their way and for classification purposes, probably to work out what was going where. But most interesting of all, you have a huge amount of copper ingots and tin ingots. And what were they used for? Well, the weapons of the day. So whoever was manning this ship, they probably loaded up in what is now mainland Greece, and they took their goods all the way across the sea, and the plan was to end up back in Syria, which is probably where they came from. But how did this all come about? How did this Mycenaean world come to be? Well, it's a complicated story, as they often are in archaeology, and it's one that back in the 1800s we knew nothing about. But now, after almost 200 years of investigations, there is quite a good picture of what was going on. And let's talk about that now. Now, I'm on the island of Rhodes today. It's a beautiful place. Lush waters, sparkling in the sun. People on holiday having a great time. But for most of its history, this was a place that was heavily fortified against invading attackers. Whether they were Ottoman Turks in the recent age, Venetians before that, Crusaders, Arab pirates before that. And even the Romans were enemies at one point who came here to conquer the place by force. But long before all that, in the Bronze Age, things weren't too different either. There are good indications that the Mycenaean Greeks were seafaring, raiding pirates of their own. And eventually, they made their way here. There are Mycenaean graves on the island and many other indications of their presence, though few fortified citadels have been found yet. So it may be more complex than we are really aware of. Not too far away from here, back in the direction of mainland Greece, is the island of Crete. And really, that is where all of this interconnected world stems from. On Crete, before the Mycenaeans got there, the most powerful and really sophisticated civilization the Aegean Sea had ever seen was flourishing. Because of the work of the archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans in the very early 1900s, today we know them as the Minoans. But what they called themselves, no one knows. The Minoans built an astonishingly advanced society on Crete. Their so-called palatial centres absolutely dwarfing anything else on the Greek mainland. The central palace of Knossos alone dwarfing most archaeological sites in the entirety of the mainland of Greece. So, by around 1700 BC, not surprisingly, the advanced culture of Crete began to be exported to the rest of the Greek islands and even the Greek mainland. Prior to this point, the mainlanders had been really kind of barbarians on the civilised fringe. But when finally getting access to Cretan objects, they began to develop new ways of running their own societies. All over the southern Peloponnese, in places like Laconia and Messenia, you see chiefdoms beginning to form from around the 15th century BC onwards. But why was this? Well, we can look to their graves for some of the evidence. You have tholos tombs and chamber tombs, really filled with items from the Minoan world. Unfortunately for the Minoans, however, it doesn't always seem to have been good news. As so often happens in the ancient world, it was nature that did them in. The island of Santorini exploding in the middle of the 2nd millennium BC, sending tidal waves crashing towards the shore of Crete. This didn't immediately destroy Cretan civilization, but it certainly had a big effect. There's evidence that people were turning away from the old religions. They were living a much reduced existence, having retreated to high hilltops, and there's even evidence of cannibalism and warfare. It doesn't seem to have been the nicest time to be on Crete. And then, soon enough, who turns up but the Mycenaean Greeks? Linear B tablets, the Greek writing system, which may have actually been developed on Crete with the help of Cretan scribes, begin to appear, replacing the old Linear A writing system used by the Cretan palatial centres. And of course, we have the single grave culture coming along too, of the Mycenaean Greeks. Individual warriors buried in quite extraordinary monumental style, covered with grave goods, of weaponry and war, and glittering gold and jewellery. Quite different to the Minoan burial styles, which we really know almost nothing about. For vast periods of Minoan Crete, people don't seem to have buried their dead at all. They may have practiced something like sky burial or sea burial, same as their Neolithic ancestors perhaps. So, by the 15th century BC, things begin to change. And after the Mycenaeans take over Crete, or, merge with them, their cultures or whatever, however you want to call it, the Mycenaeans were in charge. Minoan Crete had changed, and a new militaristic society was there. So, the Minoans gone, the Mycenaeans become the masters of the sea, and they begin exporting their culture all over the waters. You see them on Philokopi, on Naxos, on Mykonos, all over the islands, and into Asia Minor itself. The huge Bronze Age city of Miletus, now a massive dust-ridden tell on the Anatolian plain, has evidence of Mycenaeans at this time. So too Bodrum, where the mausoleum of Halicarnassus stands today. In the hills overlooking it, there are Mycenaean tombs. So, as the century goes on, the Mycenaeans begin going further and further afield, before they end up here, on Rhodes. By the 13th century BC then, after a period wherein the lords of Ahiyawa, as the Hittite texts refer to them as, had been very important in the goings-on of Anatolia, things in the Mycenaean world become very interesting, because this is the time that the so-called Trojan War is said to have taken place. And maybe it did. Maybe it did. Probably different than the account told to us by Homer, which was hundreds of years later. But maybe some evidence of what really went on survived. Then we have the late Bronze Age collapse. Things start to go wrong. The palatial elites of the Mycenaean world are destroyed. But what happens to the warrior fighting aristocracy when an elite is destroyed? They go on the rampage. So they may have ended up here on Rhodes, even joining up with the so-called Sea People seen on the monument of Medinet Habu in Egypt, Ramesses III's funerary complex, where they fight on the Nile with the Egyptian army. So who's to say Mycenaean Greeks, possibly known as Eqesh in the Egyptian sources, didn't join up with Sheridan from Sardinia, Shekelesh from Italy, places like this, and many others, to come here, then to Cyprus, where they took out the kingdom of Al-Ashir, previously the suppliers of copper to most of the world. From there, what was to stop them from ravaging down the coast all the way to Egypt? And there's even some evidence that the Peliset may have become the Philistines of the Bible. So, these are just my thoughts. But it's interesting, isn't it, how a trade system can very easily turn to a hideous series of raids and warfare when things go bad. It happened in the early Middle Ages with the Vikings, previously having traded all over, then turning on the people who they once traded with. And it may have happened in the Bronze Age Aegean. Anyway, these are just some random thoughts. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. And like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And I'll see you on the next video. I'm off to the Archaeology Museum.